I was invited by Alice, aka Eureka Wonders, to go on her IG or Instagram to go live and sketch Shopfront of Singapore. Let's go. For the full bantering, please head to her IG. I'll link it in the description below. You'll be able to find the full hour of chit-chat and getting to know each other in some ways and how I went about sketching the shopfront. My intention today will be to do a pencil sketch, then lay on top a layer of pen overlay with my trusty sailor Fude 55 degree bended nib fountain pen loaded with the Atramantis Archival Black, which is bulletproof or ink waterproof when it's dry. The pencil line is meant as a guide, so I really went through very quickly, and the intention is not to be perfect. Like I always say, perfection doesn't exist, so don't chase after it. You'll be wasting your time. Good is probably good enough. I exaggerate the building somewhat, squeezing the top, the roof, making it more narrow than what's on the photograph. That probably makes it look more, interesting, I suppose. There's no real reason other than just to make it a little bit more cartoony. Sometimes a sketch can be more fun when you're throwing in little things like that. Don't overdo it though, because then it will look ghastly and weird. At this point, I am putting in the other accessories, the stuff in front of the shop house. They are probably menus or posters or even boards where they are putting down the dishes, special dish for the day, I suppose. And I continue to put in the bits and bobs of the inside of the store. One of the things I want to do later on is to leave the highlights, or rather those parts of the shopfront that are in the light, and I will contrast it heavily with those parts that are in the shadow, primarily playing with the light and shadow of the shopfront itself. Nothing very out of the ordinary. It's always been something that I try to do, which is painting light and shadow. Now I'm ready to put in ink for the sketch itself. When I'm kind of putting down the finishing touches of the pencil line. I guess when with ink, and now that you have a pencil line, you can go through the ink line relatively quickly. I think the idea is to create a sense of freshness of the lines. When you are drawing with confidence, we are drawing with a stroke that is full of energy. It gives you tremendous amount of assurance when your audience sees it, in that sense. Or rather, your audience will see confidence in your drawing. I always think that in a sketch, when you compare it to a painting, it doesn't have to be accurate. In fact, you're trying to be loose, you're trying to be somewhat inaccurate to some extent. I always say the idea is to be correct at the macro level, and therefore you can be a little bit more relaxed at the micro level. When you have a macro right and micro wrong, your sketch will look right when you are stepping back and take a look at the holistic, from a holistic sense. So don't fret over every single detail, every single angle, every single line. You just need to make sure that when it all adds up, they are in the ballpark, and at the macro level, they are correct. As you can see, I corrected some parts of the pencil lines, but I didn't bother with too much correction. I think I have more or less captured the essence of the storefront with my pencil line, and I think that's pretty. It's good enough. I added a few figures from my imagination, and that's basically just to make it more lively, because figures always makes it more lively. Let's see, because they are in the shadow, they may not popped up properly, but hopefully your eyes can still see there are somewhat some figures in the dark. I had to clean my palette because it was dirty from a painting session earlier. So I start by mixing some neutrals, interesting neutral, basically throwing in some green and throwing in some reds and making the neutral and some browns as well, to put in what I normally do, which is the shadow first. Shadows underneath the roof and indicating where the sunlight could have maybe dropped a cast shadow on the side of the shop, and perhaps there are some elements, architectural elements with some shadow. I will also put that in. Mixed another slightly stronger version of the gray, and to put that into the lobby and the shop front itself, plus the inside of the shop. Shadows are very important. I mean, it gives a three-dimensional feel for anything that you paint. You know, the elements of the design or the ingredients for urban sketches. If you have not seen the playlist, I'll put a link right here. The idea with shadow first in the sketch allows you to then concentrate on putting in pure color on top. Pure color on blank piece of paper, or where there's paper white, it will come in as strong, brilliant colors. The same color put on the shadow will then create somewhat of a receded, shadowed part of the sketch. My colors for the skies, it's always very colorful, almost rainbow type of colors. Cobalt, queen rose, thrown in with some lemon yellow. Occasionally I will drip a bit of cadmium into it, just for fun. I'm painting the facade now with turquoise, with a bit of blue thrown in, cobalt I think mostly. You can see that the cobalt, or rather the turquoise in the shadow looks a bit muted. The turquoise without the painted shadow, it's a little bit more brighter. Your eyes can see where the shadows are, essentially. As you can see, the storefront has got writings. They are white. I have no intention to leave white, but going in with my white gel pen later on to gain some of the white that I'm losing right now. Okay, I think I'm ready to start putting in the yellow for the facade on the left and the right. And you will see that with the shadow painted first, the bright yellow and the muted yellow will now give the eye the ability to read where is light and where is shadow. This is really the whole point about trying to paint light and shadow. The idea is that you are able to mute certain color, and your eyes can then see that they are in the shadow. I described them with a bit more detail in the IG live session. Of course, only if you have the hour to spare, I suppose. Okay, so I'm now ready to put in the darkest dark. That is the receding shadow within the shop itself, trying to make it pop. No, not pop, but rather recede to the back. The darkest shadow really just to make sure that there is a separation of planes, and therefore indicating space. The idea is that you're not painting anything, but you're painting space, right? I mean, the receding part of the shops, it's inside, and the lighted part of the shops are in front. And if you are able to fool your audience by making them think objects are front and back, I think kind of succeeded, right? Space is hard. Again, go check out my playlist on the ingredient for urban sketches. Space is described as one of the ingredient to be understood and mastered. And yeah, so anyway, I hope you can still see somewhat the figures inside, and some of the darks are beginning to separate some of the objects and so on and so forth. I'm being very, very careless about the whole thing. The whole idea is to paint with a sense of macro right and micro wrong. If you zoom in to all the parts, they are all, somewhat of a sketchy line, somewhat of a sketchy depth of colors. It's kind of intentional to make it sketchy, if you like. But again, then the whole idea is to make sure that at a whole, when you're looking at the whole thing, it looks like Shopfront. So hopefully with the darks, as you can see, they are beginning to make the separation of the pieces, and is beginning to create a bit more form or three-dimensional sense of the sketch. Again, it's all about getting some of the macro stuff right. Of course, there's a lot of details that goes in as well. The dark against light, and so on and so forth. Colors as well. Generally, there is lots of green, lots of red, a little bit of yellow, and lots of contrast of dark values against light values. Some parts of the sketch, in fact, I've left it completely white. Like for example, right smack in the middle, where the sun hits the building, the shop front, you can see that I have left it untouched completely, right? I continue my adventure of putting in different details, mostly tiny bits of darks here and there, using the photo as a reference. Doesn't have to be accurate, but just give a sense. In some ways, I'm thinking values and I'm thinking depth or space. And I'm trying to think of discontinuing shapes that is behind another shape, and that usually makes the front shape pops or pushed to the front. The next stage, of course, is now ready to put in some of the lost highlights, and I'm going to use my trusty gouache. I use this Copic opaque white as well as this gel pen, and actually any white gel pen will do, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just putting in the matte pizza and other sort of highlights that I have lost here and there, getting back some of them, usually just to indicate shapes, or even just to create separation between shapes. That's basically the idea. I use both combination of the gel pen as well as Copic opaque white for the purpose of regaining the white highlights. Whites, opaque whites, is one of those cheats. Some people think of it as cheat, but actually it's not, right? I mean, when you see lots of professional artists uses it, I think it's not cheat anymore. It's just a technique, right? It's one easy way to regain highlight and simplify the way you paint. I mean, you could paint around, for example, matte pizza, but that's just more work, right? Now you can just write over it and be done with it. And at this point, I'm just playing, putting in dots of colors, playing with colors essentially. How fun. Well, it's kind of like adult coloring. The only difference is that you have put down the lines yourself, right? I mean, you could always buy books and color it, but I think it's a lot more fun when the lines are yours, and even though the photo is from somebody else, but the lines are completely done by me, and my own sort of weird and eccentric lines are there for me to color. How fun. Well, I've almost made it into somewhat of a Christmassy sort of color, very apt since it is coming to be Christmas soon. All the colors, right? It is just very, very colorful. I love it. Of course, there are muted colors as well, but the bright color makes it pops, basically. Well, I was just explaining in the bantering that in order for a color to pop, it is necessary to have a muted color next to it. In other words, if you want a yellow to pop, you want the same yellow to be muted right next to it, so the yellow will look much more yellow in some ways, right? And I was also talking about color theory. It's not necessary to dive too deeply into color theory, but some basics of color theory is always very, very important. Here I'm loading my fountain pen, which is an empty one, with watercolor, and I'm drawing with it. It's a lot of fun with it, when you can draw a nice little line and make marks with your empty fountain pen loaded with watercolor. So I continue to draw with a fountain pen loaded with a bit more of a darker sort of colors. The thing about fountain pen is that you can make very, very thin line, especially with this Sailor Fude bended nib. It's amazing what you can do with it. You can paint really, really thin line. You can go slightly thicker with the lines, and so on and so forth. I was saying during the chit chat that my favorite art teacher Edgar Whitney. He passed on many years ago, but he trained many famous watercolorists, Frank Webb, Skip Lawrence, and so on and so forth. He had a saying, and he called it, the most beautiful watercolors are calligraphy on virgin washes. And I was trying to demonstrate what that means, that you draw with your rigger or fountain pen in this case, loaded with watercolor of course, and at the back of it is actually a beautifully done wash, just like the sky I've done there, right? It's a single wash with lots of color thrown in, and on top of that you're drawing, in calligraphy, if you like. That gives it the sort of very nice watercolor feel. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this Shopfront, and stay safe wherever you are. We take out.